Hi, ladies. This week you're going to read chapter 13 of the textbook, and chapter 13 is all about Paul. So let me tell you a little bit about Paul. I think the book says this, and it's true that Paul is the, second to Jesus, the person who helped form and shape Christianity in the early church. And without Paul, we might not have had a church because of all the traveling that he did. So when you read the chapter on Acts of the Apostles, you know that the second half is all about St. Paul. And let me tell you a little bit about his biography. So basically, he was raised a Pharisee, and you know from past reading and past videos that a Pharisee was a Jewish person who was a strict follower of the law, and they really cared a lot about the letter of the law. And so when Christianity was first, a big deal, and Jesus had died already, Paul was one of the Pharisees who was rounding up Christians to try to persecute them. The Bible tells us he was a witness at the stoning of Stephen. Stephen is the first Christian martyr, and that he watched everyone's cloak while they killed Stephen. And then he was riding on a horse on his way to Damascus to round up Christians to bring them back to Rome. And on this horse, he had this big conversion experience. So this bright light blinded him. He fell off his horse, and from behind the light, he heard the words, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And this was the big moment that changed his heart and his mind, and he converted. Paul was blind for 3 days. When he had this encounter, this was with the risen Jesus. He never actually saw physically Jesus. He heard Jesus' voice. He never met the Jesus who was fully human and fully divine and walked the earth before the crucifixion. And even the resurrected Jesus, he did not meet. He just heard the voice, okay? And so he was blind for 3 days. He went to this nearby town, and this man named Ananias healed him. And then we're told that he went to the desert for a couple of years, actually, and really meditated on what happened to him. And he had this complete conversion where he became one of the largest proponents for Christianity instead of one of the persecutors. And so he started to travel a lot, and Acts of the Apostles again tells us that he went on 4 missionary journeys. He completed 3 of them, and the 4th one he was arrested at the beginning of it, and eventually we think he was beheaded, although the Bible doesn't tell us that. But on these missionary journeys, he would visit all these different places, and in those places he would set up churches. And so he was a tent maker by trade, so when he got to these towns, he would practice his trade long enough to try to visit the synagogue and try to convert the Jewish people there. Most of the time he was rejected, and then he would go to the Gentiles and tell them about Jesus. And so he became kind of known as the apostle to the Gentiles because those were the people he really ended up converting. He was also very noteworthy at the Council of Jerusalem, which happened around 49 AD. And at this council, they met to discuss what to do about Gentiles who wanted to convert. At this point, most of the people who were Christian were also Jewish. So there were many of them that believed that if someone was a Gentile and they wanted to become Christian, that meant they first had to be Jewish. And so Paul also visited the Council of Jerusalem. Sorry, my lights just went off. That happens in my classroom, sorry. He went to the Council of Jerusalem and convinced them that a Gentile didn't first need to be Jewish, that they could just be Christian. They didn't need to follow Mosaic law. They didn't need to be circumcised. And so he really did speak out and advocate for the Gentile people. And again, every place he went, he set up a church. And as soon as he felt like there was a natural leader or some natural leaders in this church, he would leave and visit another place. But when he heard about problems in the past churches that he visited, then he would send letters to help instruct them on what to do. And so that leads into the next part of the book that you're going to read, which would be about Paul's letters. There are different types of letters, and you should take notes on this. I'm going to describe these different types of letters. First of all, there's the genuine Pauline letters, and they believe that these are the letters that Paul himself dictated or wrote. There are 7 of them, and they are 1 Thessalonians, Romans, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, and Philemon. And in the preceding chapters, you'll read a lot more about each of these letters. There are pseudonymous letters, which means that someone else wrote them, and they claim to be Paul. They use Paul's name as their pseudonym to give their letter more credibility. And they believe that they were writing with the tone and with the themes that Paul would have written. There are some letters that are disputed letters, which means that theologians kind of disagree on whether they're genuine or pseudonymous. There are some letters that are called pastoral letters, and these, although we believe these are pseudonymous letters, were written to pastors in the early church, giving them direction on how to lead and guide their churches. So that's 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus. There are some letters that are called captivity letters, and these are letters that Paul wrote when he was in prison himself, and those are a mix of genuine and disputed letters. And then finally, there are what are called the Catholic letters. This is Catholic with a lowercase c, written to the universal church. All the letters I've described before the Catholic letters are named for the people or place that they're written to. The Catholic letters, on the other hand, are named for the person who wrote the letter. And you'll read about all of these different types of letters as you read the rest of the textbook. And then finally, in the book or the chapter, you're going to read about some of the themes of Paul's letters. And I want to touch on one of those themes. One of them is the idea of justification by faith alone. And what this means, if you replace the word justification with the word salvation, I think it makes more sense. But Paul is saying that it's your faith alone that saves you. It's your faith alone that allows you to be saved by God or to enter into eternal life. And it doesn't have to do with your works. Now, I do want to remind you that St. Paul, again, was a Pharisee, and so in his early life, he saw people going through the motion of a lot of actions just to say that they did it, which I'll call, and I think he called, empty works, okay? And so he is reacting to these empty works, going through the motion of things just to say that you did them, when he is talking about this salvation. We as Catholics don't really agree with Paul about this. We believe or agree with what St. James said in his Catholic letter, which you'll read about. And the basic line that St. James said is that faith without works is dead. And what we're saying as Catholics is that your works or your actions do matter, and that does play into the decision of your eternal life. And that we're talking about good works, we're not talking about empty works, but that if you do have faith, that will naturally show through your actions, and your actions will be good and your works will be good, like the service you do will be sincere. So enjoy the reading. You're going to take a quiz this week. I will post that quiz hopefully by tomorrow. Thanks.